All right, well, hello everyone. Today I'll be filming a video demo, just giving some really basic introductory tips and information about acrylic paint, which hopefully will be helpful if you have not worked extensively with acrylic paint before, or if you're maybe just interested in learning some useful tips about how to work with it and how to use it throughout this class, but also maybe in your practice after, if you are interested in working with paint. So some real basic information first. Acrylic paint, I have two different kinds of, well, you can't really see that. I have two different kinds of brands here. One from Alternatives, the other from Master's Touch. But the idea is that acrylic paint is basically a pigment suspended in an acrylic polymer emulsion, which really just means that as opposed to oil paint or watercolor paint, it's actually more plastic and can actually be used as a kind of glue or building up surface. For example, if I take a little bit of this white here and kind of mix it up, smear it around, you can see that I'm leaving behind this texture as I'm mixing and pushing around on this glass surface. And as it dries, it will actually leave behind these same marks. So you can actually use acrylic paint, even though it's a 2D material, to really build up some kind of 3D surface with a lot of deep and heavy texture. And you can even take other things like paper or basic collage materials and sort of glue them on using acrylic paint as a glue. So another thing about acrylic paint is, in general, as a suggestion for best practice, I find that using a sort of even, clear, smooth surface, like for example glass, or if you have actual palettes or any other palette at home, is a really helpful way to easily work with acrylic paint. And especially if you have a palette knife, which is this is just one example. That's also a really easy way to quickly mix acrylic paint together. And because acrylic paint is known for being a very fast drying material, unlike oil paint, which takes a while to dry, but also unlike watercolor, in that watercolor you can sort of continuously reuse if you add water and keep it wet. Acrylic paint, once it dries, will no longer react to water. So it is a good idea to try and work with it as quickly as possible. And if you are mixing many colors, just sort of plan out your palette and get a good idea of how you'll be applying paint. So right now what I'm doing is I'm just taking some simple black, mixing with some white to get this nice mid-tone gray. You can see that going on there. Now the idea with acrylic paint is, since it is still water soluble before it dries, you can work with it as both a thick and thin material. So for example, this very basic brush here can take some on and then apply it in a pretty thick, almost dry brushy coat. So this is a good way to experiment with some dry brush mark making and really explore the different textures that are afforded to you by the brush. And as previously mentioned in my video about the ink brush pen, you can really build up your tone with mark making as well, rather than just trying to simply, slowly fill in a specific area like this. But also, because acrylic paint, as I keep saying, is water soluble, you can really take a much bigger brush like this, cheap brush, and apply a good amount of water to it. And at this point, it actually becomes something that's almost like a watercolor wash, which allows you to really smoothly lay down big, even areas of tone. And this paper I'm using is not Bristol, just for some background. So when you work on Bristol paper, other materials, the way that paint is applied will be a little bit different, since this paper is buckling and absorbing a lot of water. But these two techniques, both thick and thin, will allow you to get a good range of diversity in tone and also mark from your acrylic paint. But just be aware, as always, that acrylic paint in general, especially if you do not use a lot of water as a mixing medium, it will dry pretty quickly. And once dry, you really can't do a lot of mixing. For example, if I take just straight black over here and dab on a little bit of black and look at this older section of paint that I first initially put on, it's a little difficult to actually get some mixing done on the actual surface. So if you can see here, it might be hard to tell with the glare of the light, but the black is pretty much kind of just sitting on top of the gray. And as I try and be rough with it, push it around, it doesn't do a lot in terms of interacting with that undercoat of black. And finally, I would go a little bit into thinking about color with acrylic paint. And so in general, with the brands that I found at least, even when you are just working with black and white, I found that the black and white combo tends to be a little more on the cool spectrum. That's to say, they look a little bluish under natural light. It might be a little bit hard to tell actually because of the specific camera and the fact that this paper is kind of a cream yellow already. But just know that when you are working on Bristol paper, which is a lot more pale white, acrylic paint, if you are just working grayscale already, still has a little trace of color in that the blacks aren't truly neutral, but look a little cool. As you add white, it will more or less stay in that kind of cool blue gray. But the basic idea with working with color in acrylic paint is that this is a really sort of basic fundamental level, the more white or black you add to any color, the more desaturated it becomes. So we can take a little bit of this phthalo green, apply it there, and then if I take a little of the white and apply it in, you can see that pretty quickly it starts to go pretty pale. The tone is definitely lighter, which if that's your intention to make the paint lighter, then great. But as you can see, compared to the original paint we took from, this new mixture has a lot less saturation or vibrancy. So you can tell that as you add more white to this mixture, it simply just becomes more pale, dull, and a little less vibrant. And especially say next to this gray over here, everything kind of feels a little washed out. However, if we go back to our original two colors, this light olive green and that phthalo green, sometimes what you need to do to lighten a color but also preserve that saturation is to find your next tonally lighter color, in a way, I guess, moving up the color chart. So with just what I have around, this is the next best thing. And so often a combination of white and the color is sometimes useful to actually bring up the quote-unquote tone, but without losing your saturation. So while this is a lot lighter than this color mixture right now, if you can tell, if the camera will allow it, this color also now appears to be lighter than original phthalo green. That's because we're adding a already tonally lighter color to it. And so if you still go back and take some of that white, add it in, what you can try and do is work on a sort of balancing game where even if you do decide to add some white to really bring up the tone, by balancing it out with another lighter color, you can actually play around with mixing new kinds of colors that also have different sort of readings of different sort of intensities of saturation versus if you were just a straight mix white with another color. And also what's important to note here too is that because this is originally a cool color, by adding just this cool or neutral white, this looks more blue, so less green. But by adding this lighter green to this now looks more like a true medium green. And so hopefully this gives you some idea of how to work with acrylic on a basic level, and especially by combining how much you use, or especially by considering how much you use water or not, and really how you work on applying your acrylic thick or thin, with what speed and what patience. You can really push this material to do a variety of different things, especially following what you might specifically be interested in for your different projects as you move forward, whether or not they're straight paintings or collages, etc. So hopefully this is a helpful little basic demo video on acrylic paint, and thank you for watching.